we all just go wandering down there, a couple thousand, you know, hey, we're out.
Yeah.
We put in everything, ice cream, wine,
Yeah. And chili too.
Well, if you've got something in abundance, use it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You guys ready to kick this off?
Let's go.
Let's go. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Comic-Con 2025. My name is Buck. I'm one of your hosts. This is my friend Chris Burnett. He is also known as the mayor of downtown Albuquerque because, well, I think he's better than our current mayor. So everybody give it up for Chris Burnett.
I didn't see that.
I did.
Now I'm gonna get shot. You're not.
I hate this sound system.
Just hang on a second.
Well, let me see what I can touch. I'm gonna touch something.
Raise your hands, if you can, and if you
better?
know that Elijah Wood is a DJ.
Is Elijah Wood DJing tonight?
No.
So I'm gonna start off with a really basic question. What did the three, and any of you guys can jump in, what did you think, first impression after you read the script for Lord of the Rings?
I mean, I found it really transportive. I'll never forget reading it because it was under lock and key, basically. I had to go to our casting office in Los Angeles, Victoria Burroughs, the US casting. I had to go to her office to read it. They weren't sending the script out because it was so secretive. So I went to read Fellowship in an office for 2.5 hours. And I remember it feeling so viscerally real and transportive. And this is no joke. As I was driving home, I felt like there were orcs chasing me. I was so still in the world of the writing that I imagined I was still in it for a bit. Which is a credit to Peter, Fran, and Philippa and the script that they wrote. That is obviously a huge debt to Tolkien, and as we made the movie, I think got closer and closer to the books. But yeah, the reading of it was amazing.
John, what about you?
I've just been listening to Elijah and trying to remember so many. The scripts were delivered to my house and it delivered.
I mean, he is Sean Astin.
I had gone through the whole audition process, but at this point, they wanted to know if I was going to accept the role. Like I auditioned, I wanted the part, they offered the part, and then you're like, okay. So they set the scripts in like a armored box when I set it on the counter in the kitchen, it was like, no, scripts don't use it. So I opened up and it had the name Jamboree on it, on the title page, which I would come to look, nobody told me. I guess you have to be smart enough to figure things out in this world sometimes, but that was a faux title page in case we were in a cafe or something and people saw the script sitting there, they wouldn't know that it was Lord of the Rings. They'd think it was, Jamboree or something. So,
Jamboree, the first 100 years of the New Zealand Scout movement.
You just need to be the voice for everything. Seriously, you need to be the voice for everything. Sorry.
but then I unwound the string. It was like bound with string. You know, you kind of got to do the figure 8 thing. It's just getting to the script was its own, you know, you're a part of something exciting and scary, and you haven't even opened the book, you know. So I opened it up, and the watermark, you know what a watermark is? Had my name, Sean Astin, large across every single page. That's how, if it got out, they would know who to shoot. So every page, you know, constantly throughout reading the first pages, I was distracted by my name. Like, I'm aware of my name, and you know, so and every time it sort of surprised me, there was some other layer to it. And so I had, in the audition process, I had gotten the books, and I read like 160 pages of the Fellowship. And it was the Alan Lee illustrated version. So I kept finding myself sort of scanning quickly through the script to see where the name Sam appeared, and then looking at the Alan Lee illustrations to orient myself. Like, it was almost like I couldn't go into the world of the movie with the script. It was almost like an impediment in a weird way. I was so aware. I mean, you know, if you read what we were doing this for a couple of lives.
Mine wasn't watermark, so maybe that's why.
And you had a time limit.
I did. Well, the time limit is good.
Well, there's these things called slug lines. I think they're slug lines or whatever. Interior, Hobbit, you know, Hobbiton, Hobbit hole, day, interior, something, you know, whatever. And those lines are movie descriptors. And every set, instead of like, ooh, it's Lothlorien, or ooh, it's Mount Doom, or ooh, it's whatever, I would be like, interior, I would focus on, I was distracted. The script itself was distracting to me.
In fairness, the medium of screenplay is not, it's not designed to be inherently immersive, right? It is filled
Sometimes
with,
it can be.
It can be, but it's filled with screen direction and articulation of a shot in some cases, which does take you out there.
But I think the fact that I was being cast in this trilogy, that we were going to be, you know, I was going to be agreeing to go with my wife and daughter to New Zealand for 2 years. We had just sold our home of 8 years and bought a new home, and we were moving in when it was all just too much. It was all too much. We had to get down to New Zealand for the rehearsal and start actually reading the books, and then we read the scripts of Peter. Didn't we read through them? Yeah, that's what
We didn't read through
a fellowship. But that's when I was able to, you know, that's when I was able to feel it for what it was. And then Peter screened for us in this garage screening room the animatic, or what do you call it? The animatic? No, is that what it's called? So basically, he filmed the storyboards, and in certain places there was actual animation that little sequences that we put together, and it was all performed by actors, all the dialogue from the script. It was the script in kind of visual form. And we sat there for how many hours, 7 hours or something, watching it, and that's when I started to understand Peter Jackson's concept of what the movie was. The pacing, you know, it was almost like having a pace card set for me. You know, so. Yeah, I don't know if that's satisfying or not, but and then every single day we would get script revisions, and for the first couple months at night you would diligently open the brackets, turn the pages, go to the page where the old page was, replace it with the new.
like salmon.
Yes, yeah, everyone has a new color, yeah.
Goldenrod.
Buff, you know, yeah, exactly. And you have this like rainbow script, and you know, you're like, are they changing the word the? Are they changing? Are they going to be making the? And I honestly, I would have to get to the set and look down at the clothes I was wearing to know where I was. Yeah.
Mr. Davies, what about you? What did you think when you read the script?
John, you're a literarily trained individual, a classically trained. How did you approach this?
Well, look, I only wanted to go to New Zealand for a month. I wanted a nice small part, you know, one of the kings who died or gets killed or goes mad or something like that, and just a month to visit New Zealand, have a look around, and then come back and have a proper job. Because I was quite certain that this book could never be made into a movie. Tolkien thought that, and I agreed with him. And added to which there was a fundamental problem. The size of the people. If you do not believe that I am a dwarf, and that I am taller than you two, And the elf is taller than me, and the human is probably slightly taller than an elf. You haven't got a picture? You remember Davies, Joe, and the little people?
I do.
Many, many years ago, and actually, your fathers weren't even born when that came out, but there they were, you know, the little people dancing around in the thing. And I thought, this is going to be complete rubbish. And it was really only after they'd shot a little bit of that first scene with you and Ian, you hopping onto the cart. And McCallum and I were sitting together, watching this screening, and we both at the same time went, I said, how the hell did you do that? He said, I don't know. Once you have that magic, that you make it possible for people to believe that, you knew that you were in with a real chance.
Can you recall if you read the script straight through and it go?
Oh God, I couldn't even get through the darn books. I had two sons. One came home from boarding school at the age of 12 or 13, locked himself in his room for 5 days, coming down for food, and he read the entire Lord of the Rings. The second one, my son, I thought I would read it to him, and we both would fall asleep. And it really took about 4 or 5 readings of the book for me suddenly to click into what Tolkien was trying to do, and I realized that the structure is not a dramatic structure, it's the structure of Nordic sagas. And once you get that, then you get the second problem. How the heck to make a film out of a structure that is not dramatic and it is Nordic sagas? And that's when I really went back to the script and realized the genius of the writing of that. They had managed to turn something that was unfilmable and unscriptable into one of the great screenplays that I've ever read.
When Peter would describe why certain sequences weren't in there, like Tom Bombadil, or how they thought, what was driving the plot at a certain point. That's when he made it clear to me that what the choices were. Reading the script on its own, before absent hearing his description of how they approached what they were doing, I couldn't track it. So I think that's and you know, you read it and I just can't imagine that. I never went into the world in the way you described you went in when you read the script, until after principal photography. In the sense of, you know when you're reading a book and it's coming to the last pages and you don't want it to end. That aching feeling, I don't want this to end, you're in it. And I was looking at it like an archaeologist, I say advisedly to my friend. But I was looking through the book in the wrong place. But it wasn't until the armor, what's the workshop, the games workshop, the arms workshop, something like that. Well, I got a box sent to us at the house in Los Angeles after principal photography, and I opened the box up and I took out the little, they were made of pewter, and I took out the little pewter Samwise Gamgee figurine that the artist had spent 6 weeks with dental tools sculpting my face from dozens of pictures that he had for all of us, but for me. And I felt like Aldous Huxley or something like that. I felt myself go into the little creature, and I felt myself come out of it. And I was like, oh my God. It was like dropping acid or something. Because when we're on the stage, we go in the regular size set of Brie or Hobbiton. And then Ian goes into the small scale size thing. So he gets to bump his head and feel like a giant. But we just feel like we're in a normal set. So I never got to go into until that moment. And then I was like, I really can't wait to see the movie.
Depends if you want to do it.
Yeah.
There's some skills.
Everything I say is only partially true once in a while. Sometimes when I remember it semi-accurately, I mean, I'm sure there were a million things, but I just have those distinct recollections. Like, I read the books 3 times, top to bottom. When we went to Queenstown, I had so much time off while we were there that I sat at that apartment building with the indoor pool, and the kids just played in the pool. And I read, and it was right at the foot of those incredible mountains, and I read the whole thing, but I never went into it. Yeah. And tell the story.
So you guys were in New Zealand, especially for Fellowship of the Rings, for just months at a time. What was it like being on set with everybody? And I mean, I've heard that you guys all have tattoos. Like, where are your tattoos? And then did you guys just become this family there while you were there for all those months?
You mean years?
Years. Well, I meant especially during Fellowship, because they weren't all together in the.
We shot at the same time, but principal photography was 16 months. And then we went back every year for about a month to 2 months for each film. So
5 months. With pickup shots, normally on a film, pickup shots a week perhaps, maybe 2. With 1 second unit or something like that. We sometimes had 5 second units there for 5 months doing the extra stuff that weren't necessarily involved.
yes.
It was a monumental film. It was one of the really great scale pictures that we will ever be in.
Oh, I think so too. Yeah, they don't make them like that anymore.
No.
But they're
No.
it's shot on film.
Yeah, but they can.
But it was in the vanguard of all of the Harry Potter movies and all of the Avenger, the Marvel universe and stuff like that.
Marvel.
Yeah, we're Marvel. So that's what I'm saying. But it's people are like, oh, how long were you down there? And now that you see these other franchises and how they think, 15 films into their world, they've got a constant rotation with their wardrobe departments and all these kinds of things. But when we did it, it was new. It was new. They were figuring out. It was like pioneering. And and in a way, it's kind of gotten formulaic a little bit. I think.
It's also a special circumstance. I mean, it wasn't designed to carry on. It's a finite story. It's 3 books. We were adapting 3 books. There was no sense of what's the franchise going to be after this, beyond potentially The Hobbit and so on and so forth. So that in and of itself is just it's a closed loop. You know what I mean? And yes, it had never been done at that scale. The notion of doing 3 movies simultaneously was really unique. That had never been done. But saying all of that, it also felt like, and we've said this many times over the years, it felt like the world's largest independent film. The intimacy of it, even though we were dealing with hundreds of extras on a field for battles, the intimacy of it in New Zealand, far away from the rest of the world, was extraordinary. We were also like knocking on farmers' doors to ask if we could use their land for a pickup shot because the helicopter can't get us up to the top of the mountain. When that happened, it's like, that's a really special thing that I don't think that is even replicable. I think the scale to which something is done now, even on The Hobbit, was a much larger thing. It's like 2,000 to 3,000 people in all that worked on Lord of the Rings in varying, incredibly important jobs, but across that spread. It was still in like Miramar, Wellington. Like that was the home base. It was a big extended family, and you could go to Weta Digital and like hang out with those people. It was all this kind of cottage industry that was created in a very small town, you know.
With a level of enthusiasm and a willingness to try and become the very best expert on this thing that you could possibly do. It was the most, I've never been on a set that had such focused and intense and dedicated and enthusiastic and passionate crew and construction and transportation. I mean, an extraordinary coming together of people who knew somehow that this was a very important film to do. It was marvelous.
Yeah, and everyone in that regard felt like they were a part of the greater whole, which is not always the case. When you work on something on a big scale, especially in a studio system, people tend to stay in their lane and like do their job, and they don't necessarily extend outside of that. In New Zealand, there is this real willingness to sort of put on many hats, whatever it takes to get the job done. And so everyone then feels like they are a part of the thing, rather than just like doing the thing that they were hired to do. And that kind of can-do attitude, that sort of I'll chip in and go beyond my station to help, permeated the entire atmosphere of the making of the film. Where it just felt like we were all in this thing, stuck in it together, in this way that we were also in great reverence to the thing we were making. And that enthusiasm carried on amongst all of us. You know?
And Peter's love of cinema created a kind of framing for the experience. He loved movies. He loved the history of movies. He loved the history of the industry. And so you felt, because of his passion and his interest and his relationship to cinema history, and you think of it in terms of this. If you go to make a movie about some subject or whatever, you don't think necessarily like, what is this project's relationship to film history? He was approaching this like, this is pushing the boundaries of what has ever been achieved before. There's something like the dolly. There's a kind of I don't know if it's mythology is the right word, but they would talk about like, oh, what's the longest dolly track that's ever been made? And I remember when Color Purple was made, they said, oh, the dolly track through the fields, Spielberg laid out the longest dolly track ever. And I remember when we were, to your point about like everybody pitches in, this is one of my favorite little achievements, was the dolly grips had these handles on the back of the dollies. The dollies are basically like a little car, and you could turn the wheel with the left hand, or turn the wheel with the right hand, and you can kind of decide how to move it. But they were only 10 inches wide, the grips. And so they would try and do, like in the Mines of Moria, a running shot where the dolly track was there, and the pillars, you'd be going by the pillars, and the actors are running. And the actors could run way faster than the dolly. And I said, at one point, I had an innovation in this frontier mentality where I said, why don't you guys put a pole across the back of it and attach it, and then you can stand like bobsledders on the side of it and like really get it going in a run. And I remember them looking at me and looking at each other and then doing it. Now we have a shot, and the dolly track they built was like 1,000 times longer than anything that had ever been built before. Yeah.
That's awesome.
We're going to go out in the audience. I'm sure somebody out there has a question. So,
Aaron, your questions have been great. Chris, your questions have been great. But let's bring in the fellowship, right? We don't have the friends with us today. Well, that's not excitement, though. You gotta get up. Welcome to the Albuquerque Comic-Con. What's your question?
I heard a good majority in Tolkien's work. What are your favorite works by Tolkien?
There's low-hanging fruit with Lord of the Rings. I read The Hobbit for the first time on set, like in the dressing room on little campers that we had outside of the factory, paint factory that we were shooting in. And I read it in one sitting. I went into that one. That was like, I loved it. And I put it down when I finished, and I went into Peter, and I said, Peter, are you going to direct The Hobbit? And he goes, no, there's not enough material for a whole movie. But The Hobbit would have to be up there. Can I do I'll call it, an audible, not an audible, I don't know, I'll answer it tangentially. The book of his letters, Tolkien's letters, that's one of my favorite things that I've seen produced by him, because it really is written in common language to normal people about what he's doing, and it's like you're sitting and having a cup of coffee with him, reading those letters. So, yeah.
The Riddles in the Dark chapter was such a big chapter for me. Fell in love with Gollum and the mystery of that character. The structure of that chapter is just so extraordinary. So yeah, the Hobbit was pretty much for me.
More interested in the life of the man himself, because he's really quite a remarkable man. He's one of these rare people who gets everything right. You know, he survives the First World War. He survives mentally almost intact. Nobody came back from that war without damage. But he didn't have the nervous breakdown that Sassoon had. He wasn't as completely near mentally exhausted as Wilfred Owen was, who died in virtually the last few days of the war. Robert Graves was damaged. He knew what he was fighting for, and it was that the world was threatened by German militarism, and that civilization itself would collapse if German militarism was allowed to overthrow European civilization. He comes back from the war, he marries the woman he loves, she loves him, they remain happily married. Their children love him. Christopher, of course, does so much in terms of editing and assembling his father's unpublished words afterwards. Devotes his life to it. His students love him. And rarest of all things, his colleagues love him. I mean, we're talking about academia here. Where, you know, the capacity for Oxford dons to be bitchy about each other is legendary. They loved him, and he was just an all-round successful man. By the way, let me give you, I think I may have mentioned it once before. I was buying a front-end loader for my tractor, and I was in Oxfordshire to pick it up. And I went to a farm that was called, oh dear, now I'm getting to the old man's scene.
Well, just talk fast if you remember.
Anyway, it was a Tolkien name. And I was talking to the man I bought the front-end loader for.
Mirkwood?
Yes, it was I think, and he said, oh yes, this house was owned by one of Tolkien's fellow academics, and he actually used to come here when he was writing Lord of the Rings. And he said, you see that funny little thing there? And he pointed to an odd structure. He said, that's one of the two towers.
Whoa.
They built it together in the garden. They built, and then the property was divided, and there was another tower in the other garden. And I think that had been demolished. But that was one of the original towers.
Wow. Can I just ask, throw out two titles other than Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and Silmarillion that are of his that you like?
Can you articulate a favorite that are besides the Silmarillion and the Hobbit?
Yeah, besides Hobbit, Silmarillion, and Lord of the Rings, what are two Tolkien works that you like?
Well, Silmarillion is my favorite. Real random, that little book.
Uh-huh.
You got me. Farmer Giles and Ham. There you go.
Oh yeah, Farmer John's, yeah. It's funny, the reason I wanted to ask you about it is because I was suddenly feeling guilty that I never really went to his other work and like wanted to pull it down and live in it. It's almost, I don't know why, but it's so brilliant. It's really interesting. Good question.
And then, of course, you know, he's not only a great and recognized scholar of these ancient Nordic languages, he then writes a book that basically creates a whole new genre of fiction. I mean, fantasy as we know it these days is all really derived from Tolkien. It's one hell of a life achievement. He's a completely successful man.
What is your name, friend?
My name's Christian. I just want to tell you, Sean, Elijah, John, these are the most magnificent films that have ever been made. I don't think anything else has ever been done with Christian.
Lecture's pretty good.
Casablanca.
That's fine, that's all right.
As for my question, and yeah, The Last Jedi was horrible.
You said the Last Jedi was horrible.
You didn't have to say it in the microphone. Why not ask your question, Christian?
Okay, my question is, what is out of the 3 films that you made? This is just a general question. What's your favorite memories from the film? And do you guys have any favorite memories you want to share working on the film?
They're innumerable. The thing that comes to mind, the first thing that comes to mind is maybe seeing Hobbiton for the first time. In terms of having a transportive experience where you can't see where a set ends and begins, and like the blending of the New Zealand landscape with these hobbit holes and planted trees and vegetation, and you know the bridge and the river, like cresting over the farmer's land from having gone from base camp, you know, in our trailers and getting made up to getting into Hobbiton and seeing it was completely magical. Nothing was like it. I mean, we had extraordinary sets, amazing locations, but that, nothing to take out of it. I also turned 19. I had my birthday.
19. 19 going on 49. I recall most in Seatoon, the area of Wellington where most of us stayed, the homes are very kitschy. They look like they're in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and all bungalows and kind of cool little things built in. You know, they have earthquakes there a lot, and so. But at a certain point, I wanted. There was a hill. I think it was called Beacon Hill. No, not Beacon Hill. There's another hill. I can't find it on GPS when I look at it now, because I think so many things have been changed around it. But it was on a cul-de-sac on the tippity top of this mountain. And the winds, windy Wellington, like windy Chicago, right? Windy Wellington, the winds get to hurricane force winds, 70, 80, 90 miles an hour regularly. And we were staying in a very contemporary modern house at the top of it, kind of like, status houses. And I remember Peter dropped me off once. He was like, "Yeah, that's about how I thought you lived, Sean." And like there was the tile had heating like coils under the thing, whatever. And in the backyard, which you could look at the open mouth of the Sound, where these huge ships would come in and go into the harbor, the Wellington Harbor, and then go out to the Cook Strait. And it was a pageant. Every day was a pageant of all these different massive vessels coming in and out. And in the backyard, tiny little square patch of grass, we had a trampoline that Allie, when she was tiny, really enjoyed. I remember jumping up and down, drunk, on the trampoline, hurricane gale force wind, and thinking, You know, this is unique.
Why were you drunk?
I wasn't drunk, but I had a beer. I remember I had a beer.
Oh, you hadn't come to my party.
No,
He had one beer.
and it's just the smell of beer, the bouncing on the trampoline, the feel of the 80-mile-an-hour wind, the vision of the. It was like, yeah. And then I remember seeing my wife like this.
What you can't understand, except when you're actually there, is how geologically active that whole area is. There is a great game that you Americans have never learned and probably never will, called cricket. There is a great cricket ground in Wellington where some of the finest cricket matches in the world are played. That spot in Captain Cook's map is down as safe, deep anchorage. The ground has risen that much in that big earthquake that they had. The ground at some points rose 60 feet into the air. Those are the geological forces that make Wellington and make New Zealand. There were no mammals in New Zealand before the Maori got there, except two species of bat which were blown in. Why were there no mammals there? Because New Zealand separated from Gondwana land before the evolution of mammals.
That's because they didn't have a Costco. So cricket, for those of you who don't know, is like baseball, but paced slower than golf. But we do know a little bit about the topography because we climbed a volcano, an active volcano, to do a bit of filming.
Driving around that area, you can often come to these massive stumps. And sometimes they're not that massive. Sometimes they're only 6 feet, 8 feet wide. And that's the solid basalt core of a volcano that has eroded down beside it. It's extraordinary.
I have a question for you guys. If you had to redo this whole process and you had to pick up the litter of any character, but you had to switch characters, who would you guys take? Like, whose role would you want?
Not Gimli.
I couldn't take the makeup.
I think everyone sees me as Aragorn.
The question actually was really one that Christopher Lee would have leapt to answer. Because when it was mooted to make a radio play and then a movie of Lord of the Rings, Tolkien himself wanted Christopher Lee to play Gandalf. And all his life he hoped that he would have that opportunity. So I guess I'll answer for dear old Christopher. He would say Gandalf.
I think maybe Theoden would be fun. To honor our Bernard. Yeah, because now I'm at an age now where I'm starting to look at theater a little bit and wanting to understand your fellow there with the quill, that guy, you know?
William.
That guy. Yeah, that like I'm starting to yearn to commune with language and yeah, not right now.
I should tell you that you are talking unquestionably to a United States congressman, at least, senator, probably, and one day my money would be on it, candidate for the supreme office. He used to say that, and I would mock him for his verbosity and his shoddy use of the English language. He has since buckled down, really studied administration, got himself into the Screen Actors Guild, and is really working to understand every aspect of it. There is a mastery there that's developing that will one day lead to a political office. And as you know,
You gonna do it?
So I just finished my master's at American University. Public administration and public policy, and John, it just is so heartwarming to hear you like understand what I've been trying to do. Because I think I live in my house. They see what I do and they just think I'm insane. They think I'm a crazy person, but I really do want to understand the mechanics of the union and how to help members and now that public administration and public policy was a degree, and once you see how trained experts approach water policy, or in California we deal with fire policy right now, or any of the things that are important to us as Americans, medicine or our health, our elder care, or our pensions, whatever you want to call it, the more you realize that the posturing that most of our political leaders do is insane, because it really requires a commitment to attention to detail and experimentation and follow through on things that take more than a 2-year congressional cycle or a 4-year presidential cycle. So I just hope that as the more information we are able to consume happens, that we can start to celebrate like the mid-level public administrator and turn them into our heroes, because they're the ones who are actually trying to solve problems every single day.
This is the 5-minute heads up. I'm going to make it public. This will be our final question. As well, we have to hand the room off. That's the rule.
Good job, you guys.
I still have like 2 hours worth of questions left, but we should go out to those guys because they've been standing there, and I think somebody over there needs to get the question.
What is your name?
Lupe Arianes, you must know New Mexicans love you. So my question is, when was your oh shit, this is gonna outlive me moment?
When I saw Peter Jackson answering every question that his crew could pose to him, watching with an absolute mastery of getting performances out of his actors, when I saw the effort that was going in, I realized that I'd been completely wrong and that this was going to be one of the great ones of all time. And I remember I made a fool of myself at that press conference when I said, this movie is going to be bigger than the new Star Wars. Peter Jackson went,
Yeah, but the world media was like, maybe. I've been blessed in my career to have that a couple of times. When you get cast as...
Are you going to the game?
Yeah, and Notre Dame is going to beat Ohio, and remember you heard it here first. But when you get cast in the Steven Spielberg movie when you're 12, you're like, okay, this is, and it's got a big pirate ship set that people are coming from all over the world to look at. It was definitely something like, oh, this is a part of film history now, even though it's pop culture, whatever. You could feel that it had a kind of indelibility. But I was in Whiting, Illinois, shooting the steel mining sequences for Rudy. And I remember looking up at this incredible rolling mill where this hot molten lava that was in these cauldrons would get poured out, and they were making rebar at that point. And the heat, the steam, the danger, the size of it, the antiquity, it was like this is industrial age, technology that is certainly going to give everyone around here cancer. But it was just I knew that I had found myself into a really important American story where class was being engaged in a way that it hadn't been for a little while, with other, great playwrights and, artists and people understand the class and class mobility is really kind of important in telling the human story. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, this is gonna last. This is gonna be like an important thing because it honors the sweep of that journey. That was the first time. And then with Lord of the Rings, I think it was when those scripts were put on the table.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, like when you realize that something is going to go beyond you, is bigger than you, and it's going to be sort of embraced in pop culture. I don't think that happened for me, Lord of the Rings, for a couple of years into the release cycle. I just think, you're too in it to have any perspective on it. It was for me anyway. There was a thing where it was happening, and it was exploding, and it was huge, and that was sort of shocking, I think, for all of us. We were sequestered to this small country, New Zealand, and it was, walking into these private, this is what it felt like. And suddenly it was, out into the world, and they were huge. But it wasn't until the sort of cycle of that was over, because we were so in it, and our brains were going back to New Zealand next year for pickups of 2 towels, and then we were back to Return of the King, and we're kind of in the midst of this thing still. And it's sort of not until we started sort of meeting y'all, where you would tell us your personal stories about how every single year you watch them with your families, and the sense of the sort of ripple effect of these films reverberating into other people's lives year and year and year and year, to now 20 years later, we're still hearing new stories and meeting young people who are being interested in music for the first time. It's then that you realize, this is so much larger than our experience. We're a tiny part to play in something so huge.
You remind me of something I just want to add on, which is, to me, that, oh shit, this is real feeling that you're describing, to me, is connected to something that's important. I mean, people do bad things, and they're known for all time for the bad thing that they did. When 9/11 happened, the fellowship was scheduled to come out like 2 months later, and I remember going to New York, to the Palace Theater where we had the premiere. I can't remember the Ziegfeld or one of the, it might have been Ziegfeld. So before the night before the premiere screening, I went down to Ground Zero, and a couple of the guards let me kind of come in and get next to. It was a mountain of crushed steel, and it was still on fire months later. And I remember looking at it and thinking, connecting the loss of innocence that the Western world was kind of rediscovering, and the themes of Lord of the Rings and the nature of good and evil. And all of a sudden, it felt like God had done this plan where we spent years and years making these movies, and they were going to be made ready just in time to help the world process the scale of evil that had